which is it's time to assess the situation at 343 and ask if they should go and work on something else. This is not acceptable in any other.
Let's tackle this riddle. The correct answer to the question, who is the worst game developer, is 343 Industries.
Okay?
Now,
what is 343i even up to? How does Microsoft let this dog water of a development studio still f***ing work on their biggest media IP?
343 Industries, an infamous developer within the gaming industry known almost solely for its supposed mishandling of the Halo series. Now, I started this channel thinking I could be a Halo content creator because 1, well, I love Halo, and 2, because I remember hearing that Halo Infinite was going to have a 10-year plan and that it was going to be open world. And as a massive fan since the beginning of the Halo series in 2001, I was excited. I started to think of all the cool things they could do to stretch this game out for a decade. I thought we'd complete the campaign with the Chief, then bring our own customized Spartan into single player, explore the ring, visit new unlocked areas and biomes after we completed the original story. You know, we'd be sent off as our own Spartan to tackle these new weekly missions, some banished invasions, explore some secret Forerunner facilities lost to time, and whatever else the programmers could think up. And you'd have a cool home hub or something where you could meet up or group up with other Spartans before tackling whatever 343 had thrown at us for that season. But none of that came true. In fact, the quote came from a lead at 343 who left during Infinite's development. As it turns out, once again, we were fooled into buying another half-baked Halo installment dumped out by 343. Now, I will admit I poisoned the well like really bad, but it's already been poisoned since all the way back in 2012 with the release of Halo 4. Now, there are still people out there who enjoy games that 343 released, albeit a small minority of people at this point, but I mean, hey, they enjoy the games. That's great for them. I actually enjoyed Infinite's gameplay, and please don't attack me, but I also liked Halo 5's multiplayer as well. But the 343 fans seem to get upset whenever 343 gets criticized and can't understand why people aren't favorable towards them. You might be one of those people, or maybe you're just someone on the outside looking in who has heard about this 343 drama because it's really gotten pretty big at this point. So that's why I'm here to explain it all, because some of you may have forgotten 343's history or simply don't know about it. We'll get into the current drama and the state of 343 in a minute, but to really understand why this disdain for 343 has built up over the years, you have to look back. So let's just look at each 343 installment of Halo, examine the games and the major controversies surrounding each one, to really understand why 343 and the Halo community as a whole is in one of the worst positions it's been in since 343 was established back in 2007. Bungie hit the road after releasing Halo Reach in 2010 and plopped the keys to their beautiful IP squarely in the hands of 343 to carry on the well-established legacy that was already built for them, a legacy of games that people enjoyed. So what do you do with that? Well, you change it. Isn't it obvious? 343 looked to reinvent the wheel, so to speak. Halo 4 introduced us to many new things, most of which were not well received. On the multiplayer front, we got loadouts. Loadouts were first introduced in Halo Reach, but mostly this was just for armor abilities, and that was already a problem with fans from the start. But now you could change your starting weapons, your secondary weapons, grenades, and player abilities or perks. This was in a desperate attempt to follow other popular titles at the time, such as Call of Duty. This was a change to the series and the first major controversy of 343. It was at a time which basically no one in the Halo community enjoyed it. For the first time, we were watching Halo try to follow in the footsteps of another FPS rather than being the gold standard. Sprint was also added into Halo to many fans' displeasure, which I personally enjoyed it, and I actually commend 343 for sticking to their guns on this one thing. In my opinion, you have to evolve someone, and this helped without changing the entire spirit of the game. But probably the biggest controversy of the time was when this interview with Frank O'Connor dropped in 2013. In it, he said the now infamous words, quote, "We hired people who hated Halo because of X." Now, Frankie's explanation of this quote doesn't really make it any better. He stated that they wanted to hire developers who thought Halo could be awesome if they just added something to it, which is baffling to say the least. Halo was already wildly well received, but it was clear that for whatever reason, 343 didn't have any faith in the classic Halo formula. On the campaign side, we had a new story, one which diverted away slightly from the Covenant being the main baddies. Now we would be fighting the Prometheans, an enemy much less fun to fight than its predecessors. Couple this with the lackluster missions and a lack of open area large-scale battles like we saw in the classic Halo games, and you have a campaign that lost most of its magic that the older Halo had. In fact, this was the first time that I played a Halo game and only played through the campaign once. I couldn't tell you any of the mission names like I could from Halo CE through Halo 3, it's because they simply lack the same grand vision that Bungie had. 343 also decided to make the Chief more human, which went directly against Bungie's vision of what the Master Chief was, a vessel for the players to impart themselves on while playing the games. Instead, 343 gave the Chief more lines, more emotion, and more feeling. Overall, in my opinion at least, Halo 4 did have a decent story, but all I really cared about were the interactions between Chief and Cortana. The introduction of Forerunners took away from the mystery, and that's partly why they were so great in the classic games. Forerunner structures used to be so mysterious, the terminals alluding to some long lost time ago when their race achieved great things beyond our human comprehension. Now, well, we're punching this bulbous doofus in the head and shoving a grenade into his chest cavity during a QuickTime event. Even after all of this, Halo 4 was probably the least offensive of the 343 iterations of Halo, at least in the fans' eyes. The multiplayer was, let's be honest here, it was a remake of COD, that's all it was. But the campaign was still somewhat well received despite its flaws and new direction. Regardless, it was clear from the outset of Halo 4 that 343 were making Halo in their own vision regardless of fan sentiment. But this wouldn't be the end of the criticisms, as things were about to get much worse. Now, I also have to mention the Master Chief Collection before we move any further. MCC was released in 2014, a game which would combine all classic Bungie era Halo games, and Halo 4, into one single package, giving the fans the games they loved and making it more accessible to more players than ever. However, like most 343 offerings, it was released in not only an unfinished state, but completely broken. When I say broken, I mean it was legitimately broken, as in you couldn't find any matches and would be stuck waiting for literal hours. This was supposed to be a grand celebration for the legacy that is Halo, however, we again saw nothing but disappointment. Currently, MCC has been fixed and is a blast to play, however, this again would further erode the trust that fans had with 343. Just a year later, in 2015, Halo 5 would be released, but before the release of Halo 5, the hype train was in full effect. Many people, myself included, were still jaded from the release of Halo 4 and not too happy with 343's vision. However, we all hoped that 343 would listen to the criticisms taken on the chin and give the fans back what they really wanted. Maybe 343 was still in its infancy. Maybe they had a small misstep with their first foray into the Halo trilogy. This time, maybe they would get it right and release one of the best Halo experiences fans had ever seen. The marketing and ad campaign before Halo 5 was released was amazing, but it was basically all a lie, which I'll get into in a minute. But one good thing I can say is the marketing for Halo 5 ironically gave us one of the greatest pieces of Halo media of all time, and this was Hunt the Truth, a collection of episodes presented as audio recordings of two major characters, Benjamin and Pharaoh. As a quick summary, this series was all about finding the truth of the Master Chief, because supposedly the Master Chief had gone rogue, but we didn't really know why. The commercials surrounding this game were so intriguing, bringing the Chief and his loyalty into question. All Halo fans were wondering what was going on with their favorite main character. Why was he seemingly going AWOL from the UNSC? Where was Cortana? It was all a mystery, and fans were eager to play the game to find out for themselves. So what did we get? Well, first of all, with the release of Halo 5, we were introduced to Spartan Locke, and you better like him because we will be stuck with him for the majority of the game. In fact, you play as Locke for more than half of the game, making it the first time in the mainline series where you play as Chief less than the other characters. Also, we were introduced to squad mechanics now because why the hell not? That's popular in other games, so let's add it to Halo. This really enforced what skeptics had thought from the get-go, that 343 was constantly looking to other games to find popular mechanics and then just shoving that into Halo any way they could. And then we get to the story. Yet again, we were thrown for a loop. Chief was just looking for Cortana. The entire ad campaign was building up this huge mystery and having people make theories about why the Chief would go AWOL. Well, it was answered almost immediately, completely and utterly destroying the entire intrigue built up behind the game. Not to mention, it was pretty much nothing like what the ad campaign showed. There was no morally compromising issue that the Chief was facing. He simply wanted to find Cortana, and that was it. The story was a convoluted mess of the Guardians being introduced, and then Cortana turning into this. Yeah, Cortana's the bad guy now, okay. There was really no hinting towards this. Sure, she was going through rampancy, a state that all AI eventually go through, but Cortana turning against all of humanity? Yeah, sure, drama, I guess. Then we were introduced to the Warden. I still don't understand who he really is or why he's working with Cortana. I don't know. The story was so bad that it was able to launch a YouTuber's career, the Act Man, after he made a several-part video bashing the game. By this time, it was apparent that 343 really had no overall idea for the narrative of their trilogy and were just playing it by ear. There was no cohesiveness from Halo 4 to Halo 5. With the new game mechanics and the way the new story was going, it really seemed like we were playing an entirely different game. It just didn't mesh well. With the Bungie era Halos, we had continuity between each installment, picking up right where the last one left off. You don't have to do that, but with 343, yeah, good luck figuring out what's going on. Characters get dropped with no explanation, storylines get dropped or changed because of backlash, and if you wanted to find the answers, you might have to go read a few hundred pages or so. I'm just saying, if you're a casual person playing through Halo, then you'll really have no idea what's happening. And that's just what 343 gave us on the surface of Halo 5. 343 also decided to stick to their hideous art design from Halo 4, doubling down and making the elites appear even more fat, bumbling, and useless. The Prometheans were still here and still incredibly frustrating and boring to fight compared to the Covenant. And again, a lack of large open area battlegrounds filled with vehicles, something that was a staple in the earlier games. Multiplayer was even a more pathetic affair. At launch, we were given the least amount of game types, maps, and player choice in the history of the franchise. Halo 5 launched with only Slayer, Capture the Flag, Strongholds, SWAT, and a new game mode Breakout, which was later dropped altogether. 343 did add in Warzone, a PvE and PvP hybrid mode, which was actually pretty fun. Honestly, probably the best part of Halo 5. But other than that, that's it. In fact, Big Team Battle was even stripped away, a massive hit in all previous titles and one of the most played game modes. Fortunately, it was released a month later, but was still missing at launch. If you remember this time, people were pretty pissed off. 343 has a habit of taking away fan-favorite legacy game modes and playlists that we all know and love for literally no reason. When I say no reason, I mean there's literally no reason for this. I don't really know what else to say here because they never have an answer for it, and it's really one of my biggest sticking points with them. It would take years for 343 to release more patches and updates to bring Halo 5 into a fully stocked game with all past legacy game modes and a healthy amount of playlists. Pre-game and post-game lobbies were completely eliminated, slowly stripping away the social aspect of the classic games, which was done for no reason other than 343 wanted it that way. Halo 5 multiplayer also introduced new movement mechanics going directly against what players had asked for since Halo 4. A large number of players wanted classic gameplay with movement mechanics similar to what we had in Halo 3. All of this seemed to coincide with 343 bringing in professional esports consultants. By this time, 343 was trying to take Halo into the esports arena because esports equals money. And what better way to be profitable than by making a game which can thrive in the esports realm? Unfortunately, this is not what fans wanted. What 343 really thought the players wanted though was microtransactions. No longer would you unlock armor by performing feats or gaining achievements in the game. Now everything was locked behind loot boxes. You could unlock these by playing and grinding hours and hours through the game, or you can just buy the credits to purchase these packs. That sure sounds fun. Upon this backlash of the system, 343 released a rather insulting and passive-aggressive video making fun of people who were wary of this new pay system. This would further deteriorate any trust that fans had with 343. But, and you'll see a repeating trend here, it was about to get even worse. Before we get into the last game of the series and the ultimate downfall of Halo, we first have to discuss one of the worst pieces of media ever to grace our eyes. And that, folks, is the Paramount Plus Halo TV series. Paramount Plus is of course known for releasing amazing shows, so how bad could the Halo TV series be? Halo fans all over the world waited for a Halo TV series since Halo's inception way back in 2001. Halo Combat Evolved had told such an amazing story, only to be backed up by the fantastic book written by William Dietz titled The Flood. There were so many great characters and moments that could easily be made into a movies or miniseries. Hell, by the time the Halo TV series was announced, Halo Reach, both the game and the book written by Eric Nyland, had been out for years. Halo Reach was probably one of my favorite stories in all of the Halo games and could easily be made into a gripping miniseries following Dr. Halsey, Noble Team, and the citizens of Reach as they flee from the Covenant invasion of their planet, all culminating with the escape of the Pillar of Autumn and the slipspace jump to find one of the Halo installations, a perfect setup for Season 1 into Season 2. And we even had the countless novels that had been written fleshing out the Halo story up to this point. But what does 343 decide to do with all this amazing and fleshed out lore? Well, how about out 343 throws all that in the trash and makes a TV series based on their reimagining of their already reimagined Halo universe. They did exactly that and called it the Silver Timeline. And boy oh boy, let me tell you, that Silver Timeline was one of the biggest bastardizations of a loved established narrative that the gaming community had ever seen. Now, a lot of people will point to this article and say that the showrunners didn't play the game. Defenders of the showrunners will say that this isn't true. They never said that they, quote, didn't play the games. And you know what? They're right. But the truth behind this article is even worse than them not playing the game. So let me read exactly what they said. Quote, "We didn't look at the game. We didn't talk about the game. We talked about the characters and the world, so I never felt limited by it being a game." End quote. Then Kiki Wolfkill, unfortunate 343 executive producer and executive producer of the Halo TV series, followed up with this exact quote. Quote, "Early on, we were thinking about doing something that could tie very closely with the game. What we were finding was trying to verbatim stay with everything that had come before wasn't serving the medium. It also wasn't serving the creative teams and their need to express a story and build the world through their eyes." End quote. So let me sum it all up. The showrunner didn't look at the games because they didn't want their ideas to be restricted by the games. So essentially, it's just as bad as not playing them. And then the executive producer says, they at first wanted to make a show that followed the games closely. Oh hey, that sounds pretty good. But said the game wasn't serving the medium, meaning that they didn't think the games were adaptable into a show. And more self-centered, that the games didn't meet, quote, the need for the creative team to express their story. Sorry, what? The need to express your creativity? How, as a writer, are you so self-centered that you feel the need to change a long-standing and critically acclaimed story? That's like me rewriting one of Shakespeare's plays because I just feel like I could do it better. Imagine taking a well-established and vast lore spread across several games and dozens of novels, all adored by fans, and then saying it's too restrictive. Bro, fans have wanted a one-to-one adapted Halo movie or series since the first game, because we actually like the games and like the stories they tell. Why in God's name did 343 decide to stray away from the original narrative? We will never be able to comprehend this massive blunder. What we can comprehend is that a lot of fans did not receive this well. It was more than a decade of begging everyone to make a fully realized Halo series and bring it to live action, and in the end, we were left with something that no one wanted. But even without going into the show itself, just the fact that the people writing the show went out of their ways to avoid the source material is all I have to say. Just another one of the many reasons that people dislike 343. And to even kick us all in the balls while we're down, The Last of Us releases a series on HBO Max in 2023, follows the original game source material almost exactly, and gains praise as one of the greatest TV series of all time. What a completely missed opportunity, an absolute waste that the Halo TV series ended up being. Well, finally we come to the mother of all disappointment, Halo Infinite, 343's latest installment of the Halo series. This time they promised split screen, the best Forge yet, and the best of all, a return to form. The old hideous art direction that 343 had seemed to stick to against all criticisms was gone. We saw a classic Chief in his classic armor, but yet again, things weren't as they seemed, and this time some of the 343 community managers got involved, being passive-aggressive and stirring the pot even more. Halo Infinite would be split into two entities, one being campaign and the other being free-to-play multiplayer. That term, free-to-play, just reeked of microtransactions, storefronts, and battle passes. But maybe they wouldn't only focus on that. Maybe they would actually bring back what we all loved about Halo. Maybe this time, for sure, 343 wouldn't screw up. 343 screwed up. Our very first look at Halo Infinite was met not with excitement, but with memes. The original gameplay trailer released in 2020 looked so bad that some thought it was being played on a last-gen console. It had clay-like graphics, pop-ins, Minecraft landscapes, and Craig. It was a mess, and this eventually forced 343 to delay the release of Halo Infinite another year. As you're about to see, the content they did release was pathetic, so I can't even imagine what a game would have been like if they released it on the date originally set. Halo Infinite eventually launched in 2021 with its free-to-play multiplayer, to the dismay of many Halo fans. The lack of content this time was staggering. The amount of maps and game modes were the least we had ever seen in Halo's lifetime. Once again, classic game modes were missing. Even the basic King of the Hill was missing. No infection, no assault, big team battle had been neutered as well. We only had, and still have, just a handful of similar looking maps for this mode, and yet again, 343 decided to change things that didn't need changing and added random vehicle spawns to each big team battle map. During the release of multiplayer, every fan noticed that we no longer had the ability to choose to play Slayer. The only way to play Slayer was to jump into Quick Play, which had objective game modes mixed in. So you might get Slayer, but more often than not, you were forced to play game modes you simply didn't want to play. So everyone voiced their concern, but 343's community managers came to the rescue to answer this burning question. Sketch, 343's community manager, decided to respond to this in the most insulting, embarrassing, and passive-aggressive way possible. The post is long and rambling, but let's highlight a few points to see 343's response to their fans when they ask for a basic playlist, one that's been there since the beginning. Sketch started off by saying he doesn't think 343 owes any explanation for what's been going on at the studio for the past 6 years, but it got even worse when he uttered one sentence no Halo fan thought they would ever hear. Sketch said that 343 needs to discuss the, quote, feasibility of adding a Slayer playlist. You want the feasibility of adding a basic team deathmatch? This, for me and for a lot of others, was the beginning of the end. If 343 wasn't competent enough to add a simple Slayer playlist, the game was doomed from the start. The sad thing is that the fan base had to get vocal about this, and if they weren't, we probably still wouldn't have a Slayer playlist. Many people theorize the lack of a dedicated Slayer playlist had to do with the new challenge system. You see, the challenge system was the only way to progress through the new battle pass. The challenge system at the time was tied to game modes. This would in turn force players to buy challenge swaps. Then you could swap your challenge and hope to get another one that was easier to complete. 343 denied this, but from what I saw, it kind of seemed like their plan, I'm not gonna lie here. Base challenges on game modes that you have to hope to get, and then when the player gets tired of trying to complete the challenge, they buy a challenge swap. The challenge system ended up being a massive failure and is still hated to this day, forcing 343 to rework the entire system at a snail's pace. Onto the customization front, the game now had armor sets that you could buy. Old armors that were released back in Reach were now available to be purchased. They would be rotated in the store maybe once and never seen again. This forced some players into FOMO, buying up every armor set they could due to the fears that it wouldn't be available anymore. Everything in the storefront was also wildly overpriced. And now we have to bring up the coding system. Now, instead of picking your own colors, you had to unlock coatings with preset colors. Not only that, but now they wouldn't be available for every armor core. Those were separate. So you could unlock blue on one armor core, but would have to buy blue on your other armor core. People meme on this by saying it's Spartan dress up, and I never really cared about customization myself, I get it. But even if you don't care about it, you still have to admit that this system is predatory and just designed to milk the consumer for all they have. And just because other developers do the same thing, that doesn't mean that 343 has to follow in their footsteps. But even past those issues, there's so many more issues baked into the code of the game, and there are really a lot to mention. Broken custom games, desync, the game crashing when using quick resume. By the way, this is the only game on the Series X that has this. Terrible matchmaking and rankings, no progression system, broken theater and replay, random big team battle crashes, and that's just really off the top of my head. It gets even worse than this though, folks. Infinite multiplayer was now set to be on a seasonal system. At first, seasons were supposed to rotate every 3 months, and in classic 343 fashion, they missed the mark by a long shot. Season 1 ran from November 2021 all the way until May 2022. Then Season 2 would further be extended for 10 months, and to this day, we still do not have Season 3. Instead, to make up for this, we were given a quote, winter update, which gave us armor that was already in the game since launch. It's simply padding to help quell the anger throughout the fan base. So you may say, who cares about seasons? Well, the problem is these seasons don't just give us cosmetics, they give us content, like new maps and new game modes. So right off the start, Halo Infinite was in an even more unfinished state than Halo 5 was. And even when we got new content in these season drops, it was kind of insulting. They finally gave us King of the Hill in Season 2 nearly half a year after launch, but 343 also gave us Last Spartan Standing in Season 2, one of the worst received game modes in the history of Halo. And you guessed it, challenges were tied to it. So if you wanted to progress, you were forced to play this mode. While we're on the topic of multiplayer, let's talk about co-op, which is a very, very touchy subject. Co-op was a long-standing tradition within Halo. Everyone remembers playing through the campaigns with your brother or your friend, whether on the couch or online. Well, for one, co-op was not released at launch. It wouldn't be until a year later, after many delays and setbacks, that co-op would fully be released. And guess what? It still sucks. In fact, a friend and I tried to play through the first 2 missions just recently. In the first mission, we got thrown and stuck inside some level geometry, and we couldn't revert to a checkpoint, so we had to restart the entire level. Boy, that's some great fun. Then the second mission glitched at the part where you have to inspect the Spartan and it starts a cutscene. That cutscene didn't trigger, so the door was locked, so we couldn't progress through the mission, and we just quit. But now comes the nail in the coffin for many. 343 made possibly one of their largest blunders by getting rid of split screen co-op altogether. Keep in mind, this was after they took it out of Halo 5, realized they screwed up, and then promised to have it in Infinite. That turned out to be a lie, and mention of its cancellation was mentioned in a small aside in an interview with the developers, like it never even mattered. This was the catalyst for creators to jump on the wagon and call out 343 for their horrible business practices, missed deadlines, unfinished or missing content, constant season delays, and seemingly constant lies to the fan base. Huge creators like Critical and some ordinary gamers discussed the failure of 343, naming them the worst developer in the industry, and Ackman even boycotted the franchise after this entire split screen debacle. After all the anger building up over the years, this would trigger the largest backlash 343 had ever seen, and that's really saying something. Hashtag Fire343 started trending on social media and Twitter. At this point, it seemed everyone had had enough of 343's constant under-delivering and complete lack of transparency with what was really going on behind the scenes. This time, fans were actively pleading to Microsoft to fire 343, take them away from the Halo legacy, and never let them make another game ever again. And this is finally where we find ourselves today. To this day, we still don't really know what's going on inside 343, but recently a large number of 343 campaign staff were laid off. It's a very unfortunate thing to see developers suffer because of brain-dead management, and that's really where the fault lies. People like Bonnie Ross, now gone thankfully, Kiki Wolfkill, and Frank O'Connor have been running 343 this entire time. If we have anyone to blame for all of this, it's not the people who are programming under them, it's the upper management. Their refusal to listen, their refusal to change for the better, and their insistence on making Halo in their own vision in spite of the fans. The problems in management have been corroborated by Patrick Wren, a former 343 designer who stated on Twitter that the state of the Halo franchise is a result of, quote, incompetent leadership up top, which led to, quote, massive stress on those working hard to make Halo the best that it can be. This quote was really disappointing to read and really confirmed what the fans had theorized since the beginning. Microsoft can also be to blame for this. One is that they insist on using contract hires for development of their Halo games. Programmers get hired, try to learn the Slipspace engine, and then get let go. It really seems like a rotating door at 343 Industries. To add to this, the fact that they let the management go on for so long at 343 without any kind of damage control is the reason we find Halo in the state that it's in today. The only redeeming thing is that we have the inclusion of Joseph Staten, but sadly, he left the studio in the beginning of 2023, making many fans lose all hope of Halo returning to its glory days. Everything I stated in this video are reasons why people hate 343 and don't want them to continue making the Halo franchise. What was once a revolutionary IP, an IP that the entire gaming industry looked up to, is now the laughingstock of the gaming community. Even if you enjoy the most recent Halo games, the fact of the matter is that most, if not all, have been released in a broken or unfinished state, not living up to the fans' expectations. Missing game modes, lack of maps, lackluster and forgettable campaigns, a confusing storyline that seems to get scrapped with each new installment, and just no concrete overall vision for where Halo was going. Not to mention, Halo's foray into free-to-play multiplayer was completely botched, with 343 delaying seasons and features countless times, taking away any trust fans had in the developer on delivering on the live service aspect of the game. And just step back and look at the overall sentiment today. Every single social media post that 343 or the Halo account puts out, it's met with bashing, criticisms, and general disdain at 343. So much so that when the rumors, now disproven, were swirling around that 343 was going to be removed as developer, people were actually celebrating. Just look at this post on the main Halo subreddit. The article received over 10,000 upvotes and had people saying that this was the best thing that ever happened to Halo. Currently, we're drifting in space. It's unclear where Halo will go. After those rumors were going around that 343 was finished, the studio head himself had to come out with an explanation. The announcement read, 343 Industries will continue to develop Halo now and in the future, including epic stories, multiplayer, and more of what makes Halo great. Now, with 343, you always kind of have to read between the lines. The fact that they said epic stories and did not mention campaign makes me think that the new single player installment or DLC is not coming out for a long time, if ever. I mean, the fact that they had to release this statement regarding the once flagship title of the Xbox is kinda sad. One thing I have to add is that the game is not dead, not yet at least. I booted it up for the first time in months and was still able to find a game during peak hours, though I've heard that some of our European and Australian friends are unable to find games even at peak hours. The only redeeming thing I could see from all of this is that we finally have new management, and the only light at the end of the tunnel is the fact that Bonnie Ross is now gone. Pierre Hintz is now the head of 343. Maybe he can do it? Either way, it's really sad to see how far the Halo series has fallen. There's simply not much hope left in the franchise at this point. All I can say is this: I will not buy the next Halo game at release if there even is one, unless it's made by someone other than 343. I will wait to see if it's actually good and has the proper amount of content compared to the classic games, because I, like the rest of the gaming community, is kind of fed up with all the setbacks, false promises, and the lack of content that 343 has given us over the last decade. And after looking at 343's legacy, all the pitfalls, all the controversy, the broken promises, and the mishandling of the Xbox flagship series, it's not really that hard to understand why they're one of the most hated studios in the entire gaming industry.